The final mission to save mankind has failed, and we'll be bringing you up-to-the-minute coverage of our countdown to the end of days, along with all your classic rock favorites. This is Q107.2.
As far as 2012 movies go, Seeking a Friend for the End of the World was likely little more than a blip on most people's radar. The film begins with humanity abandoning their hope for survival as an asteroid hurtles towards Earth. And it centers around the story of two strangers coming together to help each other fulfill their final wishes.
I'll run into you at a support group or an orgy or something.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
It's generally considered a melancomedy or dramedy, whatever combo of comedy and doom you can come up with, somewhere between This Is the End and The Road. But it certainly isn't just a comedy as the marketing would have had you believe. It stars Keira Knightley with a rare appearance in a non-period piece, and Steve Carell playing yet another sad man. The film's certainly a hit or miss with most people, and didn't do so great with critics and audiences. This guy certainly had some strong feelings about it. In my view, it was fine, but also notably unique in its premise and execution. I consider it a more intimate version of an apocalypse movie. It's an initially silly rom-com that takes place in a dire and imposing context, which ultimately forces the narrative to pivot towards a rather melancholic and existential direction. So in this essay, I want to explore these concepts and how they relate to our own experiences with existentialism, and what the idea of the end might mean for us. The threat of doomsday has been a prevalent subject throughout most of our history. The wrath of gods, alien invasions, general global collapse, and a plethora of other distressing ideas have plagued humanity's anxieties for millennia. Given our widespread fixation on the end times, it's evident these apocalyptic themes would be the central plot points of hundreds of films and television shows. Stories of zombie takeovers and rapidly spreading pandemics, saving the world against extraterrestrials or asteroids, the rapid onset of natural disasters and cataclysmic devastation. On the other side of that coin, it's not difficult to find stories of post-Armageddon survival in barren wastelands or miserable dystopias. I adore science fiction, and watching larger-than-life narratives with these powerful points of view feels immensely thrilling and gratifying. But what I don't see much of are down-to-earth stories of regular people experiencing the chaos and commotion. Tom Cruise doesn't count.
What are you doing with the rest of your life?
Probably catching up on some me time, find God, maybe move around some chairs.
Penny and Dodge, along with the rest of the world, have 3 weeks left to live. They're not world-renowned researchers or highly skilled pilots. They're just neighbors fleeing their crumbling neighborhood. With the help of Penny and her car, Dodge plans to act on his true desires and reunite with his high school sweetheart, the one that got away.
Hey, I know a guy with a plane. If you drive me to where I need to go, I can get you to your family.
And with Dodge's help, Penny plans to fly home to her family in England. This is the plan they laid out, at least, before setting off on their bizarre journey, encountering various characters along the way.
Hybrid cars don't need as much gas.
Yes, they still need a little gas, don't they?
They ultimately chose each other instead, but I'll get to that later. I wanted to mention the movie's title is inspired by Chris Cornell's song Preaching the End of the World. It's a plea for intimacy in a time of vulnerability, and I feel this film ultimately embodies that sentiment. Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, in addition to having a long-ass title, provides a sort of glimpse into what might actually happen if we thought the world was ending. It speaks more to the human condition aspect of these stories, an apocalyptic slice of life, if you will, albeit an exaggerated version for comedic effect.
That is amazing, and you know what? It's his birthday today.
Why didn't you tell me that? Happy birthday!
As I mentioned, the film is generally classified as a dramedy. Its mixing of humor with this bleak subject matter seems like a mismatched clash of moods. And indeed, the change in tone from one scene to the next is often jarring.
Okay, what a fucking weirdo.
The overall sentiment gradually drifts from lighthearted comedy to mournful melancholy, which many reviewers have criticized.
Is that my niece? Yeah, she sounds beautiful. What did you name her?
But on further reflection, maybe this roller coaster of emotion fits in well with the overall picture. Perhaps the unstable responses the film brings about is exactly how we'd experience situations like this, content in one moment and distraught in another, a push and pull of solemn acceptance and outright panic and absurdity. Most of humanity generally wouldn't embody the likes of Will Smith or Kate Winslet or Brad Pitt in this sort of scenario. And if all hope was truly lost like the movie indicates,
We're fucked, Bob.
there's really no sense in doing so.
This is the fucking Ark. This is the Titanic. And there is not a life raft in sight.
With that angle laid out, the film has the ability to explore end-of-the-world behaviors that have nothing to do with killing zombies or waging war with other primates. The threat isn't even present yet, just a looming grim reality hovering precariously over everyone's lives and sense of security. There is no master plan to latch your hopes onto, no false air of optimism. Here, there is only finality, and the way you choose to approach it. Throughout the film, we're presented with variations of this approach. Some, like Dodge initially, would prefer to carry on as usual. He continued exercising at the gym, and during his morning commute to work, and answering inexplicable phone calls about insurance plans. All this while having just been deserted by his wife, and not to mention during the impending extinction event. Similarly, his maid maintained her weekly visits to his apartment.
Listen, Elsa, you don't have to come next week, or, ever. If you don't want to, it's okay.
You fighting me?
At first, this sort of behavior seemed ridiculously unrealistic. I figured no one would actually act like this in these circumstances. But on second thought, it's not uncommon for people to adhere to routines as a form of comfort, to feel they have some semblance of control and stability in their lives.
Elsa, what are you doing here?
It is Thursday.
Are you shitting me, Elsa?
So it could very well be this pattern would still apply in times like these. Elsa's certainly not unaware of what's going on around her, as her last words to Dodge seemed more like a wink and a nudge, a discreet farewell, rather than hopeful delusion.
See you next week, Mr. Dodge.
Okay.
It's curious we can often point out things in other people that we can't recognize in ourselves. Dodge tells Elsa there's no need for her to come clean his apartment after just having arrived home from his own job. In this sense, his name is a little too on the nose. He's refusing to face his own problems and instead finding any way he can to avoid them.
I don't want to be like Dodge because he just lives his life in regret, and that's certainly not how I would want to live my life, and I try not to. So I try to use his life as an example as how not to live.
In reference to his character, writer-director Lorene Scafaria said, "I was drawn to the withdrawn, and I felt like I was trying to write this guy for a really long time. Just someone who was sleepwalking through life. So who would be the most interesting character to see face all this? Someone who was half dead already, who was watching his life unfold over the last 3 weeks of his life."
I regret my entire life.
Okay.
Okay. Bye now.
After discovering his wife had been having an ongoing affair, he finally breaks free from the spell and decides he'll spend whatever time he has left with the real love of his life. Meanwhile, Penny laments she's wasted her time on losers when she should have been with her family.
I do this. I put my energy in the wrong places. I give my time to the wrong people. I mean, when I think of all the holidays I didn't spend with my mum and dad to be with some guy I used to know.
Sometimes events or circumstances take place which force us to reevaluate the sense of certainty we have about our lives. It's interesting that we often become more ourselves only when we're made hyper-aware that we don't have forever, as though we had been ignoring this inevitable fact all along. Given her newfound awareness and realignment of priorities, Penny instantly took Dodge up on his dubious offer for a plane ride with his friend. They then proceed to encounter plenty of characters with differing responses to their impending doom. There are survivalists who ardently prepare for a post-apocalyptic world, which in its own way is a form of coping, another way to feel like they still have control over their lives. It seems what these characters are actually equipping themselves against is fear. If you can make yourself feel that you're prepared for what's coming, perhaps you can fend off the creeping sense of dread inside. And if the survivalists were right all along, then the joke's on us, I guess. Conversely, there are those who panic.
Did it make you think how you would react to that, and did you come to any conclusion?
Yes, I did. I came to a very grave conclusion that I would probably just run around screaming my head off and losing my mind. I would have no, I would be awful to be around, and I'd be of no help to my family.
I suppose this would be deemed as the most likely reaction to the end of days, just people absolutely losing their minds. And in the vein of black comedy, a couple characters even off themselves in one absurd way or another. This guy mistook Dodge for the hitman he'd hired for himself.
The man committed suicide via homicide 2 weeks before the apocalypse. I'm not really concerned with any road warrior wisdom I may have missed out on. Okay?
This sort of thing didn't make much sense to me when I first saw the film years ago. Why not just live out the few days you have left? By now I've gathered they either felt a couple weeks wasn't enough to extract meaningfulness from the lives they'd lived, or they simply wanted to face mortality on their own terms, rather than sticking around in unbearable anticipation for the fiery unknown. Another common response would be to simply let loose, have your last hurrah, let go with reckless abandon.
Sarah and Dave brought heroin.
Put some Radiohead on. I want to do heroin to Radiohead.
For some people, that can mean an ecstasy-fueled orgy at a frenzies. For others, it can mean confessing their love to a friend. I was going to say some ways to release your inhibitions may be healthier than others, but if it's the end of the world, then health concerns obviously aren't on the table anymore. Watching these scenes and imagining potential real-world parallels, the expression "live every day like it's your last" comes to mind. Despite it sounding like it belongs alongside the live, laugh, love decor in Hobby Lobby, this is probably what that phrase would look like when carried out. The point is, when faced with the end of days, people would presumably feel freer to try things they've never tried before. Or they finally get around to doing what they've always wanted but can never muster up the courage to do.
It's everything I never wore.
This is the main category Penny and Dodge fall into, as they finally found the resolve to choose what they assume would make them the happiest. Or, I suppose rather than finding it, the resolve was thrust upon them.
But why insurance?
I didn't like the law, and the economy was headed in one direction. I'm the type of person, I feel more comfortable with a safety net.
Whoops.
Seeing this array of behaviors brings forth the question of what we'd be doing during times like this. How would we want to spend our last days? When we're watching disaster movies, it's not a thought that comes up a lot. We're following the hero's journey after all. There are lots of cool explosions to be had, and not much room for thoughtful introspection. However, if this scenario were to play out in the real world, it's likely we'd embody an amalgamation of these responses, fluctuating between them, trying to find our own place to cope with what's to come.
That just hangs over you, and you sort of do take it home in a good way, because you think, well, there is a finality to everything, whether it's 3 weeks, whether it's 50 years.
As I mentioned before, there's no sense of false optimism in this film. In fact, whatever optimism you may have had about the story was probably shattered by the time you reached the end. The film had been drifting more and more into melancholic territory throughout, until finally reaching its unexpected conclusion.
Oh God.
I honestly felt stunned when I first saw this ending and the credits started to roll. I mean, of course the film had been indicating the world was going to end, but surely there was going to be some deus ex machina to turn it all around, and then Dodge and Penny could continue their corny romance. But the asteroid did hit the Earth in the end, and presumably killed everyone. The gravity of the direction it was going really hit home for me in this particular scene.
On behalf of myself, producer Bruce Hammond, and everyone here at the network, we bid you all a fond farewell. It has been my pleasure to bring you the news for the past 27 years. Good night, good luck, and God bless.
It felt so real and uncomfortably somber. This isn't the type of apocalypse movie ending we're typically used to seeing.
But it is enough time.
Never would have been.
I'm scared.
The world actually ending wasn't something I'd even considered would happen despite all evidence pointing that way. So in the ensuing minutes, or even days, I was forced to genuinely reflect how terrifying the situation would be. It's an incredibly unnerving thought, so I may have had a bit of an existential crisis. The basis of the film emerged from Scafaria's own experience with an existential crisis. She had just moved away from New York when the 9/11 attacks occurred, and as she describes, everyone had their own period of crisis. Quote, "It really was that feeling of this giant event affecting your tiny human behavior. People were having babies or breaking up. People were either coming together or realizing, what have I been doing all this time?" So for the film, what if you took forever off the table? What if you made it truly finite? And what if the ticking clock in the movie, other than the sun coming up, was the loudest ticking clock ever? There are several factions of the philosophy of existentialism, but I want to explore the ideas of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. He believed our ultimate goal in life should be to find peace and contentment, and argued that the main obstacle holding people back from this was the fear of death. He felt that if you can accept death, without ignoring it and without the promise of an immortal afterlife, then you can attain true happiness.
Look at him, sound asleep in his sandwich board. You know why? Because he always knew the end was near, and he is currently not surprised.
He felt that people are so preoccupied with the fear of death that it ultimately detracts from our appreciation of life. You may be thinking the events of the film contradict his philosophy, since people seem to appreciate life more when faced with imminent doom, but I don't believe this is the case. The way I view it, most of the behaviors shown to us represent mere distractions. They're mostly ways to avoid fear, or find ways to cram all the things you think you should have done years ago into the span of 3 weeks. Because death at this point would mean that it will all have been for nothing.
I did ruin your life.
Oh, you did. I had a really long head start.
If anything, most of the characters are exacerbating their fear, scrambling to find anything to avoid confronting it. Epicurus also believed, since death comes with the end of consciousness and pain, that it makes no sense to be afraid of it. He says, and I paraphrase, "Death does not concern us, because as long as we exist, death is not here. And once it does come, we no longer exist." Dr. Simon Critchley, the author of the Book of Dead Philosophers, cites another philosopher to emphasize this notion. Quote, "Wittgenstein says eternal life is given to those who live in the present, because we live so much of our time either in the future, thinking about whether I'm going to be well, whether I'm going to be wealthy, or in the past, with our traumas and memories. The difficult thing is living in the present." And a large chunk of the philosophers I'm concerned with focus on that. And for me, that's incredibly consoling. When I discussed types of responses to the end of days, I left out a significant component: those who purposefully accept their fate and find ways to make their remaining time truly meaningful.
It is just the positivity. I think it's the idea that you can have a film about the end of the world, but actually it be about what is important in life. It's about not getting stuck in those kind of those horrendous moments, I think, that we all dwell in so easily. It's about kind of going, look, it's about the people, it's about friendship, it's about love, it's about laughter, it's about joyous moments. It doesn't always have to be about doom and gloom, and I found that incredibly uplifting and life-affirming.
A central tenet of the philosophy of existentialism is existence precedes essence, the idea that the fact of being is more important than a designed purpose. It opposes previous philosophical standpoints and posits that we have to create our own meaning in order for meaning to be relevant in the first place. I think Penny and Dodge began to reach this conclusion in the latter half of the film.
So what else are you going to do when you go home?
I'm going to listen to my mum play piano. I'm going to sit in my dad's garden. I'm going to hang out with my brothers. I'm going to play with my niece and my nephews. I'm going to do all the things that I missed out on for so long.
They spent time together enjoying simple pleasures and reached some form of closure in their own ways. Penny was able to speak to her family and know they were okay without her.
This sounded good. It sounded really good.
She chose to stay with Dodge largely because she felt she'd finally found what she'd been longing for, a romantic connection like the one her parents had. Dodge confronted his father, who turned out to be the friend with the plane. He had deserted Dodge and his mother decades ago, and never attempted to reconcile. Much like his son, he'd been evading his problems for most of his life. Dodge, however, was no longer willing to accept skirting the lines of discomfort.
I'm just trying to say I'm sorry.
Well, just say it then.
But he was ultimately willing to let his grudge go in the face of death.
It doesn't matter anymore. We're in the same place now.
Well, I know I wasn't there for you back then.
It's not too late.
In these small yet profound ways, Penny and Dodge did what they could to tie the loose ends in their lives. And that in itself is a gift, regardless if the world is ending. Once you reach that place of acceptance, you contemplate what's truly important to you. You may care less about the things you'd be doing and more about who you'd be doing them with. I'm not gonna lie, the romance aspect of the film felt somewhat ham-fisted. Penny's character delves too far into manic pixie dream girl territory. And although they jokingly address the Hollywood age gap,
Obviously, you're very young. What are you, like 30, 31?
28.
Oh, God.
the chemistry still felt more father-daughter-like than romantic to me. Most notably, platonic friendships are severely undervalued in popular media. As the title expresses, the narrative would have worked just as well if Penny and Dodge were simply friends, bonded through their parallel experiences. And in my opinion, the last scene would have felt just as impactful. However, I did appreciate that it didn't altogether adhere to the typical rom-com formula.
For me, I mean, I'm a romantic, so what would I, I love watching people fall in love, and yet I feel like they've gotten really formulaic over the years, and there's not much of a sort of ticking clock or stakes or anything like that, but...
The end of the world.
The end of the world.
I also appreciate that Dodge's character was willing to face death alone so Penny could have a chance to see her family again. I don't know, maybe the romance helps speak more to the fact that in these circumstances, it's more likely that people who otherwise would have never spoken can come together despite any perceived differences.
I thought that somehow we'd save each other.
We did.
I think this story ultimately reminds us to ask ourselves perhaps the most important question. At the end of the day, what do you value most in this world? If everything is meaningless, what do you choose to put meaning into? Maybe it's enough to just look into someone's eyes and share in the beauty of the world, even on its last day.
I'm really glad I got to know you.
I'll leave you with this. On the final day of his life, Epicurus is said to have written, "A happy day is this on which I write to you. The pains which I feel could not be greater. But all of this is opposed by the happiness which the soul experiences remembering our conversations of a bygone time." Hey everyone, this is Steph. I hope y'all enjoyed. I had a really fun time making this video. Let me know if you felt the same way about the movie or if there are any other movies that affected you similarly. Okay, bye y'all.